My talk this morning is with Geoff Wood, and it's Wednesday, the 1st of July 2020. Geoff grew up in Midland, schooled in Midland, and of course worked at Midland, and we'll get to his recollections of the Midland Abattoirs. Good morning, Geoff. Can you tell me where you were born and when you were born?
Morning, Don. I was born at Swan District Hospital, as were most people in Midland, it seems, because everyone I ask says they were born there. I was born on the 6th of August 1956, and I grew up in North Street, 28, and I think from my last visit down the street, that's the only existing house at that end of the street that's still standing. Behind a wall now, though.
Certainly grown into units along that area now.
Yes, all our neighbour houses are all units, and they've all been pulled down, but 28 North Street still exists.
I grew up at 23, and it's now a block of 6 units.
Oh, yes.
And I haven't driven past there in 10 years.
I drove past. I think I was going to visit the Burns family, and they weren't home at the time though. But that's how I know there's a lot of units, and I was quite surprised that 28 is still standing.
Amazing. Well, Todd's lived there.
Yep. The Todds were next door neighbours.
And the people opposite?
There was Snells, the funeral directors, and Taylors, who were there, also the funeral directors.
They were related.
Gavin Snell and Mrs. I can't remember Mrs. Taylor's name, but they were brother and sister, and Belle Snell and Bill Taylor were brother and sister.
Right.
So
that's right. Yeah. And Foskett's lived down the road.
Foskett's lived down the road next to a friend of mine, Miller's, Doug Miller, and also Struthers lived next door on the other side of North Street, and who else was there? Templeman's lived over the road, slightly just over the road next to the Taylors. Yeah.
And there were tennis courts down there near you somewhere.
2 houses down, there were tennis courts. And from memory, it seems there was tennis courts in every street, but they weren't active when Trevor and I were growing up. So we just used to use it as a play area, and vacant blocks behind the tennis courts and to the side were tracks, which we used to call the tracks, which was just a vacant block where people used to shortcut through. But really great for riding your bike around. Yeah. So we used to spend half our life down there, actually.
What about down the end of the street?
Down the drain. We spent the other half of our life at the drain, which these days you would have a fit if your children went down there, because we never thought of snakes, but the place would have been full of snakes and rats.
But we had plenty of tadpoles.
We had a great time. We used to build dams and dam it up, and we're just one of the best places in the world when you're a little kid.
That was down near the railway line.
Yep, it followed the crescent and the railway line, which curved right around the edge of Midland. Yeah. So and we used to go all the way down the end of the drain from North Street all the way down. I think it was John Street. Oh yeah. Because you'd go all the way down, ride your bike all the way down. Because each side of the bank had a track down, so you could ride your bike up and down. Hopefully you didn't go over the edge and fall.
It's pretty deep down in there.
It was very deep, and especially in winter when we used to have a lot of rain, it filled right up. So it was great fun.
It's about where the Morrison Lodge nursing home is now.
Yes.
Ran through there.
Yeah, it's all filled in now. I think it's probably an underground pipe now, which we would probably have crawled through, which we used to do in Midland anyway.
So you had the one brother?
One brother, Trevor, younger. He's 18 months younger than me.
So your early years were spent in North Street, like growing up, and then schooling would have started. So
schooling, we went to Midland Primary. At the time, the demarcation was Sayer Street. We were on the wrong side, so we should have gone to Midvale Primary. Oh. What happened was my mother worked at Freecorns, and at the time my father was working at, I think it would have been the MR, the end days of the MR. And my grandparents lived on Frederick Street, which is just around the corner from Midland Primary. Yeah. So Mum booked us in from there. So what would happen is Mum would drop us off at our grandparents in Frederick Street. She could go to work. We could walk across the road to Midland Primary, walk home for lunch at our grandparents, and at the end of the school day, walk over to our grandparents who had spoil us and feed us up, and then when Mum finished work at Freecorns, she'd pick us up at 5:30.
Oh.
So
what did she do? You gone?
She was just convenient rather than if we'd gone to Midvale, then it would have been she would have had to leave work to come and pick us up because of.
I wasn't aware of those demarcation lines.
It's
a bit like district football.
Yes, it works the same. I'm not sure. I think they changed it later, but at the time that was.
Oh.
If you're on this side of the street, you had to. That was you're in Midvale primary school area. This side of the street was Midland. So.
Amazing. What did Mum do at Freecorns?
Mum was. She was just on the till in the early days. Then she became. She'd end up being second in charge, and Lindsay Johnson was the manager at the time. So Mum was the second in charge at Freecorns, and that was in at the later days when they were in Stafford Street. I think they had like the Manchester area was in Stafford Street. But my main memory is at the end of Helena Street, where we used to, after school we'd walk through and see Mum on the way home.
And you mentioned your dad worked in the MR. Do you recall what he did in the Midland Railway Company?
Dad was a cabinet maker, so and my main memory of the MR is the Christmas party at the end of the year. On the MR site, they'd set it all up, and it'd all be stalls and things, and as later in the evening, you could watch the light of the train coming down the crescent from the old MR line. There's Father Christmas on the back of it with all the presents in there for the kids. But you could watch it coming down from a fair way, and it'd cross over the Helena Street crossing, which no longer exists. But you'd watch the train come across because that was when Father Christmas was coming. So that was pretty.
So this
cool.
is where Midland, the centre point, is now.
Yes, that's where the party, the Christmas party was. So from that vantage point, you could see straight down the line. So you could, and I think. Parents always knew that it was coming because they'd make sure you could see the light coming, and it would slowly get closer and closer. And then, of course, that's really exciting when you're 5 and 6. So, and I got a cricket set that year.
Yeah, is that right?
Yeah.
You would have remembered living so close to the railway line, the trains coming through in the middle.
Still
of the
remember the trains going past down because. At the end of North Street, you could actually watch the trains go past, and when you're young, that's when you put pennies on the track.
So your primary schools years were spent at the Midland Primary, which is on the corner of William and Morrison.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
And you would have gone through to grade 7.
Yep, and I can remember all my teachers, and I've actually written. I sent a thing into Midland. Remember Midland with all the teachers and for that period,
right?
So, and who were the teachers at the primary school?
Who was your principal?
Was when the first year I was there, it was Mr. Collins, and the deputy principal was Mr. Appleby.
And if you got into any sort of trouble, was there any sort of punishment this year?
Not at primary school. It was pretty good at primary school. High school was a different matter.
Is that right? We'll come to that.
Yes, high school was different, but primary school, Midland Primary was great. Had a great time at Midland Primary.
Is that right? So you had plenty of sports days, concerts. And
the only thing I think they went wrong with at Midland is my wife went to Midvale Primary, and they've got photos of every year. Midland Primary had none. I've got one from grade 3, which is really quite ratty, and the other photos I've got is grade 7 football team when we beat Midvale.
A lot of people never took. Well, there are a lot of photos of old Midland, but it was only the box brownie really that we had in those days.
So, Midvale Primary actually had every year. It's a class photo.
It was a professional photo.
Every year because I've actually put a few of them onto Remember Midland because my wife had them. But nothing. The only ones I've got from Midland are the football team and a grade 3 class photo.
So you played footy on Midland Oval?
Oh yes, yep.
In the mud?
In the mud, yep. And Midvale Oval and it's Middle Swan Oval, all in the mud. Yeah.
So did you play underage football?
Yes, I was a terrible football player. Yeah. Shocking.
You're part of the team, mate.
Oh yes, yeah. I think everyone played football, and I was just not very good at it. Yeah. It was not.
What about cricket? Did you play cricket in the summertime?
I used to play cricket at school until I got hit by the ball. And just about broke my hand, so that sort of
right.
put me off a little bit. So,
Yeah.
and I sort of thought, this is bad. I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah. So your days at you got through grade 7, okay? Did
Yes.
you enjoy? You said
We
you did
really
enjoy
enjoyed primary
Yeah,
school. They
yeah.
were good teachers. They were good friends. I was just
Sound like good
I
memories.
still see a lot of the guys there from and
Terrific.
some of the girls from Midland Primary.
Terrific. So then, big move to a high school.
High school,
New school too.
yeah, high school. High school was good. It was we had a lot of good time. Of course, we wagged it a lot, and so it was more social at high school than learning.
What
anything.
school was this?
Governor Stirling.
Oh,
So it was more a social thing. Like me and a lot of my mates, Bruce Macbeth and a lot of those guys, we'd turn up at school and then decide we could go down to the Railway Institute Hall and play billiards, or Spiro's Deli and go over there and play pinball. So it seemed like a better idea than sitting in a class all day. So,
yeah. And they never tracked you down?
no.
There was no corporal punishment?
I think they were surprised when we turned up sometimes.
Oh, is that right? So the truancy laws were pretty loose?
Yeah, there was no. I think that you're more scared of your parents finding out than the teachers.
Teachers.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
But the worst we did was we'd get caught smoking up on the hockey field and get the cane. So,
Oh, yeah,
which
okay.
didn't really traumatise anyone other than it hurt.
Yeah.
But,
Was that on the backside or on the hands?
Hands.
Yeah. Six?
No, for smoking you only got 2.
Oh, is that
Yeah, yeah. One on each. Yep.
So on the weekends, as a high school student, you would have spent a bit of time around the river?
Even at primary school back then, you were allowed to. Parents were. I think it was a lot safer then. From when we were about 8 or 9, we'd ride our bikes down to the Westie, swim across, and help ourselves for a few watermelons, some grapes.
Yeah.
But in summer, every afternoon, finish school, go home, ride straight back to the Westie, and the little jetty next door, which we used to call Looney's Jetty, and there was also one up, probably half a k up, that ended out on Caversham Avenue.
Oh, yeah.
But just across from Caversham Avenue, we used to go up there a fair bit as well, because that was better watermelons, I think.
Oh,
Better watermelons and nicer grapes up there. I think it was Joe Rackich's farm, I think, from memory.
And winter time came, a lot of water came through.
Floods. When we were at primary school, on Morrison Road across, it used to be, it was at the back of the clothing factory.
Yeah.
I can never think of the name.
Wills.
Yep. You could, at the bottom of the primary school, you could watch the water actually rise, and it'd be flowing so fast, and be on the news. 7 News that night. They'd have film of it in Midland. I've often wondered if they kept hold of those films or anything.
Yeah.
They probably didn't. But yeah, the floods were amazing, and the river. You'd go down the river. I think I went down the river a couple of years back, and it had flooded.
Yeah.
It was quite high,
It was
where
in
that
February.
new play area was, and that was all underwater. But those floods were incredible. So,
Every year.
Every year. Like now, it's amazing. If
Would have been dangerous to swim down there.
Yes. But then again, back then, we used to swim in some strange things. Rocky Pool. Can't believe we used to swim in Rocky Pool. It would have been freezing.
How did you get up to Rocky Pool?
Bike. We'd ride our bike up Swanview Hill.
Fair way.
It was a fair way, and but when you 11 or 12, it didn't really matter.
Yeah.
You'd get halfway and you'd have to walk the rest of the way up. But then you'd have that coast down to the pool, then walk up to the actual main pool. But because it was coming down off the hills, it would have been freezing cold, that water. But it was always full in summer. It would always flow all through summer. Now it just doesn't flow at all in summer. And up to the train tunnel and have a walk through the train tunnel.
You walked through the train?
Yeah.
You didn't get caught with the train coming through?
No, that was after the train. There was no train then. Yep.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was just interesting. Well, a lot of places in Midland were really interesting to go to. And I've taken my girls back since up to Rocky Pool and stuff. They love it.
Well, yeah, where you used to.
But I certainly wouldn't swim in there. It's, and not that the water's no good, it's just cold.
And coming back to high school days, did you eventually get into schoolwork, or was it all sort of fun and games?
It was all fun and games.
Was it?
It got worse as it went. It's initially the first year was was okay because it was sort of first year high. You're a bit intimidated.
Yeah.
After that, you get the hang of it, and then you think, oh, really? So when I couldn't wait to get out after third year.
Did you do your journey?
No, yes I did, but it didn't do any good.
Oh, right.
I think
Remember how the results used to come out in the journey?
Oh yes, in the paper, and we used to get it in the mail, which was terrifying, because I knew I didn't do any good. But saving grace there was I actually had already got an apprenticeship with Vickers Hoskins. So when the results came out, it didn't really matter, because when they looked at it, I said, it doesn't matter, I've got a job. And I got a job as a boilermaker. And my father said, I'll give you 2 weeks, because he said, you don't even know what a boilermaker does, do you? And I said, not really, no. He said you'll last a week, and I lasted 2 weeks.
And where were they?
Vickers Hoskins was in Ashfield, right across from the station. If you went to Ashfield Station and got out the train, you'd just walk straight across the road to Vickers Hoskins. It was just a massive building. It was huge, but they did all obviously boilers and large metalworks, which was really not me, I'm afraid.
And did you? How did you get? You caught the train down there?
Caught the train, walked to Midland Station from North Street, jumped on the train, went straight to Ashfield, and hopped off, and same coming home for 2 weeks. Yeah,
for 2 weeks.
Yeah, for 2 weeks.
Did you ever get into Perth and hang out in there as a teenager?
We didn't really hang out. We'd go to the movies even when we were in primary school. When we were young, school holidays, me and my mates would all jump on the train, go to Perth, go to the movies, Piccadilly Theatre, and all those, and watch a movie and go and just hang around Perth for the day and then come home.
What about in Midland movies?
Midland, renowned every Saturday. Three Stooges, love the Three Stooges. Still do, actually. But yeah, and every now and then Mum would take us in the evening. I saw the Jerry and the Pacemakers movie, Ferry Across the Mersey, at Renown in one evening. Mum took us here because Mum didn't mind pop music.
No.
So she was quite okay with like the Beatles and things like that. So she didn't mind. Also went and saw Sound of Music, of course. They didn't everyone. Yeah. Loved the Renown. It was just good. Only bad memory of the Renown is me and Trevor wanted to go really bad one Saturday afternoon, and Mum was really ill. Mum was asthmatic, and we just, because we were young, we just badgered her. So and she finally gave in and said, off you go. And we came back and she'd been taken to hospital because she was really crook. Because we were young, we didn't realise. So yeah, that was the only bad memory about it. But
have you got any recollections of the Midland Town Hall?
Not a lot. Only we used to go there from primary school to every now and then they'd have a movie on.
Oh, okay.
School kids, and so we'd all get in, primary school kids all in a line, walking across with the teacher, file in there, and they'd have I'm not sure why they did that, because they also used to run movies in the classroom, because all primary schools had a projector.
Oh, yeah.
We used to have those as well, but every now and then they'd take us to the town hall, but other than that, really, never had much to do with the town hall.
And you lived pretty close to Midland Oval. There was a fair bit of activity took place there.
Yeah, Westrel sports, not sure what it's called. We just used to call it Westrel, but it was cycling, and every Friday night they had it on. But it had a lot of stalls and everything, so you could go there and buy popcorn and fairy floss, which we all liked. And they had the cycling. They'd also have a band on every now and then. I vaguely remember a band called Outer Limits, which was a couple of guys from Bellevue, and they were in that. I vaguely remember.
Remember Kevin Anderson?
Yes, I do, actually.
Yeah. He was a Midland boy that did pretty well in music.
Yes. So the Restral, that was like a big thing. And then every now and then they'd do a big thing at Midland Oval. It wasn't the Westral, but it was like a big Midland do. So and they'd have everything there. And there was also a Midland used to have a friend of mine used to call it the Midland Mardi Gras, but it was I'm not sure, I'd never known it as that name, but it was in Helena Street, and it was on once a year, and they'd have a band to be on. I vaguely remember Johnny Young, performing there.
I remember they were throwing tomatoes.
Tomatoes, that was Brian Byrne, yeah. He threw a few tomatoes, yeah.
Johnny Young stopped playing.
Yep. So, but that was always a big night. We were in primary school, so what we'd do is we'd all go to the shop and buy water pistols and run around there making a great nuisance of ourselves. But had a great time. We were harmless. We didn't hurt anyone. You just run around with a water pistol, end up with more water on yourself than anyone else. But they were fun. All good nights. And they stopped doing those. It was a real shame when they finished.
Remember the Scotties days?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
At Midland Oval.
Midland Oval, yep. Oh, yes.
Highland dancing.
Yep. Yeah, that was all part of the big Westrel thing. So it used to have, and marching girls. I think they used to have marching girls.
Yeah, they did. I remember that.
Yeah, a lot of those things that you don't get anymore.
So the days of fun as a teenager started to mount up, and you had to get a decent job.
Oh, yes.
So where did you go from there?
Well, that was when I went to Vickers Hoskins, which saved my butt with the bad results at high school. Lasted 2 weeks, and then, of course, once you come home and say, no, I didn't like it, I threw it in, you get the, well, what are you going to do now? Three options. Brickyards always sounded too hard for me. Railways was basically similar to Vickers Hoskins, which I just left, and you really needed an apprenticeship unless you wanted an office job. Or the Abattoirs. Abattoirs was quite easy to get into. You just went down there every morning, and they would either pick you for a casual day's work, or if they were needed people, they'd give you a full-time job. And as a 15-year-old, you became a knife hand, which meant as soon as you used a knife, you got an adult wage. Now, my father was a tradesman. He was earning, I think, from memory, it was like $49 a week. And I was a 15-year-old kid using a knife at the Abattoirs, making $90 a week and working half a day because they worked to tally. Once the tally's finished, you went home. So I'd be home by 1, 2 o'clock every day. Started at 7:30, used a knife, so you actually got a knife hand's wage, which was. That's
amazing.
Yep.
You got more money than
my father. Who was a tradesman. Yeah.
Do you remember the bloke in charge of the labour hiring?
Teddy Francis, I think at the time.
Teddy
Francis, and Bill Todd was also one of the managers. Joe Mountain.
He was a neighbour of yours.
Yeah, Bill Todd lived next door.
Yeah.
Yep. He used to put.
Midland was like that.
Yes.
Everybody knew everybody.
Yep. And there was also Phil Rigg was in charge of the byproducts area, I think.
You mentioned a big name in Midland there a minute ago.
Joe Mountain.
Yeah.
Yes, he passed away a couple of weeks back.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Yes, he was. Him and Trevor were a young brother. Joe used to look after him a fair bit because he was young, and Trevor was one of those likeable kids. Yeah. So Joe, if Joe wanted to have an early day and go to the races or something, he'd come and get Trevor off the floor and say, "Can you drop me off at the races?" And then that'd be Trevor's end of Trevor's day, and fees had finished.
That's right.
And you'd be there, be 11 o'clock, and you'd know you're going to be there till 4, and there's Trevor walking out, so waving goodbye.
Amazing. So when you report for work, was that casual or was that full time?
I got full time straight away when I went over there.
As a knife hand?
No, actually, when you first walk in, you go in as a labourer, which is just an ordinary job.
So what were you doing?
As a labourer, I was hanging the hooks. They're called skids and gambrels down the bottom, and it's a separate chain to the slaughter chain, and you hang the hook onto the chain. It takes it up to the floor, and these are the hooks that hang the sheep up from the back legs. If you ever see them hanging, they all go up. They've got to go through a sterilising process, so they come down to the basement area. They're sterilised, and someone's got to hang them back onto the hook, so they go up to the floor again. Tedious as.
So they're on a moving chain.
Moving chain, separate from the slaughter chain.
Separate from
yeah. So they go up, and basically you're just pulling 2 hooks out of a bucket. They're big tubs, which all get tangled, which makes it harder. hook them together, sit them on the train and on the chain, and then take them up to the slaughter floor.
Did they have personal protection equipment in those days?
No.
What did you wear?
White clothes, that was it. No glove, nothing.
What sort of shoe? What sort of footwear?
I just wear sand shoes down there.
Well, they would have got wet.
Yeah, it's not wet in that. Those rooms are not wet rooms. No.
Okay.
No. Up on the slaughter floor, you wore gum boots. But
so how long were you
there?
in that first job?
That first job, hanging the hooks, was probably only 2 weeks, and then
right.
I just went to the office and said I want to work up on the floor.
Right.
And they said okay. And also back in those days, they'd give you a knife and a steel, but no one would show you how to use it.
Mm.
So it was not like now where you'd probably get trained for 3 weeks on how to sharpen a knife and how to steel a knife without cutting your fingers.
Did you have gloves?
No, nothing. Also, the knives these days, the knives are hand moulded and they've got like a finger guard, so you can't slide your hand along the hand.
Oh, okay.
Back then, the best knives were Green River, which were just a wooden handle, which you're not allowed to use anymore either. Mm. But they had no guard, so if you hit a bone with your hand, your hand would slide straight along and you'd slice with your fingers. Yeah, that wouldn't happen now. And no gloves, so I've got a million cuts also.
Mm. They would have had a pretty extensive first aid room there.
Yep, and a nurse on hand all the time. Yeah. So I actually cut myself quite badly later in about 1976.
So the progression from a young 15-year-old walking in the door,
yep,
working in that area you just described, what was the progression up onto the floor?
It's quite daunting because once you're up on the floor, it's very wet, it's very noisy, and it's there's a lot of machinery and a lot of moving parts. So you walk in there and it's also slippery. Mm. So the first time you go up there, you put on what they call it, you put on as a trimmer, and you stand on the chain. It's a moving chain, so it does, depending on the kill, how fast it will go. Mm. So can't remember. Used to do so many a minute, like 4 a minute or something. If it was a big chain, so. Which is quite fast when it's going across, and you just trim off like bits of leftover wool. Yeah. Anything that's a bruise, you would cut the bruise out. That was just your basic trimming job, or you'd just anything that wasn't supposed to be there.
So
you just cut it
you
off.
actually stood in the one spot.
On one spot,
you had a particular task.
Yep, and then as each labourer, the trimmers, would have you'd have people on sprays, water sprays. They'd be washing the sheep down. This is on the mutton floor.
And that's all they did?
That's all they did all day. You'd stand there, you'd walk there, so we'll assume it's 4 a minute at the time. Mm. Every 15 seconds you'd be washing a sheep down, and they'd go, and then the chain would stop for morning tea for 15 minutes. Right. You'd walk off, go and have your morning tea, come back, another 3/4 hour. What they did is they had a smoko break roughly every hour. It wasn't quite. So you'd start at 7:30. You'd have a smoko break at 8:30.
So everybody was allowed to go outside and have a smoke.
Yep.
But how long did that last for?
We were still smoking when I was there. So
no, but I mean the break.
The break, 5 minutes.
So every hour you had a 5-minute break.
Pretty much, yeah. Just that was what it was for.
A standard practice.
Go out and have a smoke. Yeah.
Incredible. They love it today, wouldn't they?
Oh, yes, yep. But because they're moving chains and you couldn't sort of go, I'll just finish my smoke. As soon as that chain started, you had to go back in.
Oh, yeah.
Because they weren't going to wait. If you stopped the chain, it was the end of the world.
Yeah, so if you missed your trimming bit, then
someone else would have to do it after.
Oh, they would.
Someone would get it at the end, yeah.
Oh.
And the slaughterman is the same thing. It's each slaughterman has a different. It's not like a solo slaughterman who did the whole body. Yeah. We used to do certain jobs. The idea was you're supposed to be able to do all of them, but not. I think Trevor could do pretty much all of them.
So were you? How long were you on standing in that one spot, doing that one trimming job? How long would you have done that for?
While you're a labourer, they could alternate. Yeah, depending on which day you went. One day you'd go and you'd be doing that job. The next day you'd be on there and you'd be on the trimming rail, which is it comes off the moving rail, and you clean it up, like you'd take out broken ribs and stuff. Or you'd be taking legs off if they were no good, because the meat inspectors would mark them as they come along the chain and then fling them off the chain, so they're on a static rail. So if they had broken legs or they had different Ovis or Sarco.
So there were meat inspectors there continuously overseeing.
Yep.
To make sure that the standard of practice was up to scratch.
Yep.
So at least you weren't stuck with the one job for any great length of time.
A lot of people were. A lot of people actually did jobs that's what they did. Like a lot of the ladies, they put on the wash, and that's what they did every day.
And they didn't mind that?
No, because it was basically that's all they did. It's mind numbing.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was thinking. So after you'd done your trimming in this particular section when you first went up there as a knife man, what was the next progression up?
Then they put you on the learner's chain. You actually have to ask. If ever it's quiet, if you have a good run of sheep, there'd be no trimming. They'd be nice and clean, like lambs would go through. There'd be nothing to do. So you go onto one of the slaughter platforms and then learn that actual slaughter job. So as you do that, then all of a sudden as you get better and better, Joe Mountain would come down and say, "Okay, I think you're okay. You can do your test now to be a slaughterman." So then the next day you'd come in panicking, and they'd put you on that job. Like initially, I was a pelter, which you punch the wool off the body. So they'd leave you on there for half a day, and then Joe Mountain would call you in and say, "Oh yeah, not too good, are you? But you'll get better." So they'd give you they'd say you're now officially a slaughterman, so your pay would go up.
So a slaughterman's task was. Can you explain a slaughterman's task?
On a chain like that, the first task would be the sticker, which cuts the throat, and then you generally have three. One would stun, one would cut the throat, and the other one would hook the body onto the chain. Right. They'd alternate. So
and they were all classified
all
as
slaughtermen. Yep. So that would be, you'd have the one guy stunning, the other guy doing the cut, and the other one hanging the leg. Right. Now, what they do is they'd probably do that for one run. Smoko break would come, then they'd alternate. So then they'd all be doing the same job. They'd go up a chain which would take them up to the slaughter floor, which was an incline, because the sticking box was down. And it's different on each body. Like beef is a different thing, and pigs are slightly different as well. Yeah. Go up to the chain, and they'd go onto the legging table, which is because then they're hanging on one leg. One leg is sticking out, so the leggers would take the wool off the leg, and take the hook off, and then you'd have a labourer in between who'd hang that leg onto the hook and drop the other one down. Right. So the second legger would do the other leg.
Oh, right.
So, and then once it got to the end, you'd have the labourer who would hook it back up onto those hooks I was sending up earlier. They would come up the gambrels and the hooks. Oh, yeah. That's when both legs would be hooked onto the gambrel.
Oh, okay.
So that's another labourer. Then you'd have your tally clerk who would tag the sheep. Right. Like if depends, because they needed to remember which run it was who owned these sheep. Like there might be a run of 3,000 sheep, and they'd be owned by West Farmers, for example. Right. They'd have to know when that run finished.
And who would be counting them?
Tally clerk. That's what they did.
Right.
Tally clerk. They'd set
on the floor.
Yep, on the floor, right at the end.
Not prior to slaughter.
No. Oh, they'd know how many prior to slaughter because
they'd be penned up.
But on once it's the floor, there's no real. If it's all lambs, there's no demarcation. It's just the next lamb would be the next run. Yeah. So it's all right if it's rams and stuff in there. You can tell.
Geoff, at what point did the skins come off?
Not yet.
Oh, right.
So this after the legs are the wool's taken off the legs, they drop down onto the ordinary floor, and then the tally clerk tags the back leg because they're clear of the wool.
Yeah.
The next step is what they called I can't remember what they called them now. But what they did was they cut down the belly, not opening the belly, only the wool. Yeah. And then they cleared the flanks round to the just the belly of the thing would be cleared of the wool. It would all be, and that cleared both sides of that. You had to actually be okay to do that because you had to use both hands because you had to use your knife in your wrong hand as well to do the other side.
Oh, yeah.
And then they went down to what they called a tail out, which was part of, I was a pelter, which meant you also tailed out. So you took the tail off and cut the wool clear of the tail, and then grabbed both sides of the wool at the top and pulled it halfway down the body. Halfway down. It's been years since I've done that. Halfway down, and then it would go, and the front legs would be hooked up onto an A-frame. This is still a moving chain. It hasn't stopped. You'd have a labourer putting the legs into the A-frame, which lifted the front and the brisket up, and then the brisket guys would clear the brisket, and the front leggers would do the front legs, clear the front legs, and then they would drop down, and then you get to the pelters. What you've got is wool still attached from the middle of the sheep all the way down to the neck, and the pelters would punch. The reason you punch it off is you don't want to tear because if you've seen lambs, they're all nice and neat.
Yeah.
If you tear them, they lose all their value.
Yeah.
So you actually punch out the one side and then lean back on the wool and just pull it off slowly.
Right.
And then the next job is a scalper, which takes it off the top of the head. So.
And then how do they dispose of it off the floor?
There's chutes. There's chutes in the floor. All along the floor there's like holes which are stainless steel, and as they take the wool off, where they scalp the head, it'll run across the hole in the thing, and as you take it off the head, it'll just drop down the hole. You just got to be careful you don't go down with it.
To the floor.
Down to
underneath. The floor underneath.
Which was a big an open area where trucks could back in, and they'd load all the skins onto the trucks
and
to
go
to
straight out.
the
Drying sheds.
Yep.
A lot of drying sheds out there. Bushmead Road. And
yes. Yeah, a friend of mine actually, his father looked after those, oversaw those, so that's where we used to hang out a lot too.
Yeah. So
once the wool's off, they take the front hocks off because they're still on there.
Yeah.
Then they go to the gutties, which is what Trevor's main job was. So they'd open up the belly, take the gut out, and the liver and the lungs. They'd get thrown on a tray behind you.
Yeah.
And that's when the meat inspectors would inspect it all, and the body, because the body was then just a carcass.
Yeah.
So they'd inspect it all, make sure it had no CLA, which is large glands.
Yeah.
Make sure it was clean.
Yeah.
And if they found anything wrong, they would tag it, and it would go off onto a side rail, which is where the trimmers would clean it all up.
Right.
It'd go back on, and then you'd have another inspector at the end of that side rail who'd make sure that it was all clean. Once it was all clean, then a labourer would put it back onto the moving chain. Go through.
So they're little stations, side stations or sidings, as it were.
That's what they are. Yeah,
for,
just siding
for just trimming and getting the carcass up to standard.
So that was your ideal job if you were a trimmer or a labourer, because it was a static chain. You could actually go out and have a cigarette every 5 minutes if you wanted, because it wasn't a moving chain.
Well, I was thinking in my mind, if you were in this moving chain and you had a call of nature.
We also had a rover who was like a slaughterman who could do everything. So what you'd do is you'd call the rover down. He would take over for that time. Even if you're a crook or anything, he'd let you go off for a.
Oh, so they didn't stop the chain.
No. Stopping the chain, because the chains were always set for a time. I think Joe Mountain used to set them for 2:30 each day. So that was, if you stopped the chain, it added on to the day.
Okay.
So you always knew you were going to finish by 2 o'clock or something.
I see. It was all timed out.
Timed, yep. So, and we used to do, the tally was 70 bodies per slaughterman, and so every day they'd set it at 77. So you always got seven over tally every day. Yep.
Yeah. So it was pretty good money.
Oh yeah, very good money. Yeah. Especially when you're only 16, 17.
Yeah.
And if once you're a slaughter, you had to be 18 to be a slaughterman, but even then, once you're 18, you're making double what everyone else is making.
Amazing. So once the carcass is clean, stripped, gutted, everything's been taken off.
Yep. Goes through a second wash, which washes it up properly, then goes through another inspection thing where they make sure it's all correct. Another 4 inspectors will be there making sure everything's right. The old days, for Canada, they used to cut the glands. They used to have to slice all the glands, but they stopped doing that. Then they'd go through the last trimming thing where they could run them off again onto a static thing. They'd come back on. Then they'd go to the tally clerks again, who'd do the weights, make sure that they were the right weight, or if they were canners, they would send them off onto the other ones, and the other rails, and then the ladies would bag them.
Bag them, right.
Yep.
And then from the bagging, once they were bagged...
They'd go, depending on what their market was, they'd go either into the chillers or the freezers.
And the chillers would be for what, local?
Chillers, it depends, because you can export chilled meat, but it has to go by plane, of course.
Yeah.
So just depending on the market and who bought those cheap. Like if it was West Farmers, it would. These days, if it was West Farmers, it would probably go to Coles.
So how did they, when they bagged them up, how did they get them down to that freezer works down the back end?
Still a moving rail. It's still
the rail went all the way down.
At the end of the slaughter chain went back around. It had reversed on itself, so it was a continuous chain. But then there was a static rail between the slaughter chain and the bagging rail, where they'd go past and they'd be. I can't think of the name of what the job was. I know it was. It will come to me eventually. Yeah. But it was a static rail where they'd assess the carcass, work out if it was. And they'd stamp it as well. You know, you see the line.
I've seen this, yeah.
Where it has lamb all the way down each flank.
Yeah.
And then once it's on there, they would push it onto another moving rail where the ladies would bag them and put tags on the leg if needed. And then they'd go downstairs, which are the chillers are all downstairs, I think, from memory. And they'd just go down and
a lot of private operators over there too.
Yeah,
that would,
had greens and
they would have done their own cutting up for local markets.
Yep.
So that pretty much summarises the whole.
That's the mutton chain.
The chain.
Yep.
But there were also other floors.
Yeah, beef chain was a similar thing, but the beef would come along on the same level, and then I think. Bill Todd's father was actually the beef stunner. He would. It was a captive bolt gun, which is a pistol with a 22 in it on a handle.
Right.
And so they'd tap him on the head, which would fire the bolt.
Yeah.
Drop the cow. Then they'd open up two big doors, and the cow would roll out. The chain from upstairs would come down, and they'd generally. I think if it wasn't a big kill or it wasn't too many, that the slaughterman would actually chain the leg. And they'd lift it halfway so that the neck was, and then they'd open the neck up and then bleed it, and then it would be lifted up onto the floor. And exactly the same process. That it'd be pelted, or the pelt would be taken off. The guts would be. So basically the same thing.
Similar process through the chain.
Yep.
And were the slaughtermen, the sheep slaughtermen, ever get to be beef slaughtermen, or were they two different categories?
Two different things. You could, I think, Trevor could do both on some cuts, but for the most part, I was only ever
sheep.
A sheep.
Sheep. And what about goats? Were they?
Goats were done on the sheep chain, same. So,
right. So there'd be a separate goat day.
Yep. Or they'd stop. They'd have a gap. What would happen is the last sheep for the day would come through, and then all the labourers would be cleaning the floor down, washing everything down, and then maybe 10 minutes later the goats would start. So it was all on the same day, but just a gap between the two.
Yeah, and the pig floor was a separate
as well. So I never worked on the pig floor. I think I did about twice, but
it would have been the
same thing, moving chain,
same process.
Yep. The only difference is after the slaughter, the sticking, they'd have a burner, like a burner to burn the hair off.
Oh, okay.
They'd put them in a hot water bath,
yeah.
which loosened the hair, and then they'd have like a little oxy thing.
Because they would have gone off to Huttons and Watsonias and places like that. There wouldn't have been any much freezing.
No. I think a lot of those were local.
And so we're at the end of the slaughtering process.
Yep.
If I can just take you back briefly to how did the stock arrive at the abattoirs?
Generally,
and get onto the slaughter floor.
Generally, from when I was there, it used to be trained because the line was still there when I was there.
Yeah.
But I don't remember it ever being used very often because it was mainly trucks then.
Was it?
And they'd back up to the ramps, and they'd be unloaded into different pens because they'd know which pens were. The pens would all be marked. They'd either go to the sale yards for auction, or they'd already know who owned them, and they would herd them up into the undercover pens. And they did have a pet sheep which used to lead them all up there. So so you'd see I can't remember the pet sheep's name, but it did have a name. Trevor would probably remember. But yeah, the sheep would come up and all the others would follow, as sheep do, and then they'd take the pet sheep out, and then all the others would be there waiting to be slaughtered. So probably not a very popular sheep though. And
the stock sale yards, or the stock area there, would have been controlled by the stockman, I suppose.
Yep. Cliff was the manager at the stockyards. I can't think he could have been. I can't think of his surname. But his name was Cliff. But we used to dread when the downtime came in abattoirs. They'd put you out in the yards, but so you'd still be working. But you wouldn't be on the floor mutton chain. There were mutton chains. There were 4. Now, if there was in the off-peak season, they might run one chain. So the slaughtermen and everything for the other 3 chains would have nothing to do. Now they used to put you out in the yards for a while. We used to dread going out in the stockyards because Cliff would always keep you there all day. Whereas if you went anywhere else, they'd let you go home at lunchtime. But no,
so the days of the abattoirs, you started there, I think you told me, 1972?
72 after I threw my job at Vickers Hoskins, yes.
So the government sort of had other ideas about this whole stock industry.
Yes, it seems, yeah.
And the abattoirs, I'd have to get the exact date, but the last kill would have been about 78.
I think it was that 1978. Trevor was there for the last kill. I wasn't, because I was doing other things at the time, but we then, all the Midland slaughtermen, all the ones who wanted to go, we did a night shift at Rob's Jetty for 2 years. We would be picked up from Midland and driven to Rob's Jetty and did our night shift, and then
on the chain,
it was exactly the same. We just used Rob's Jetty Abattoir. So I think that lasted for a couple of seasons, but then
the place
then they ended up shutting Rob's down as well. So
I recall doing some tally work late '79 and going down to Rob's, similar to what you did. And the blokes down there said that Rob's would never ever shut.
I think they said that about Midland too at one stage.
Yeah,
in the early days.
But I mean, my memory was, do you recall the number of sheep, like the maximum number of sheep that you would have ever slaughtered in a day?
Let's see. I think one chain, there were 2 big chains and 2 small chains. The 2 big chains could do 5,200 a day each, and the small chains could probably do 4,000 a day each.
So
and in its peak, they'd run. It
would be unrealistic to do 10,000 plus sheep a day.
Yeah.
And cattle, I think, was about 600.
600, I believe. Yep. And not pigs. I really don't know.
Yeah, I think it was about a couple of hundred.
Yep.
I'd need to talk to someone that knows more about that.
Yeah, the pigs. Yeah.
But like the abattoirs to Midland was a major employment.
Well, yeah, a lot of the Italians and the English came over. Like a lot of people who lived in Vivash, worked at the abattoirs. So.
Yeah, it was a sad time when that sort of closed up, and to see it today, you just wouldn't know the place existed.
When it was a down season, when it would be finishing, you'd go to work at 7:30, you'd be home by 9 in the morning. A lot of people thought you didn't have a job.
Do you recall how the blokes felt when the word came through that?
A lot of them were devastated. Like a lot of for me, it didn't really matter so much. It was
hadn't been there that long.
No, but some of the guys I didn't have a family at the time, so it was just me. But you had people there with young families who were all of a sudden out of work.
They weren't given any opportunities to relocate.
Not as far as I know. No.
That you know of?
No. I think because of the nature of the job, you couldn't. Different these days. If you've got a clerical job in the government, they can try and give you another job.
That did happen.
But other than that's, I think that's why they did the night shift at Rob's, because it kept them employed for a little while.
But I know the livestock trade, the exporting of livestock was a major factor that took place after the Abs closed.
Yep.
But then there were still abattoirs in regional areas.
Yes.
I was just wondering whether many blokes went to the regions.
I think some of them went up to Linley Valley, which
Okay.
because there's Abattoir Linley Valley, had Fremantle had Watson's,
Yeah.
which was a pig abattoir.
Anchorage had one there too.
Yeah, Anchorage and Gingin had an abattoir.
Yeah.
So it depends on if they wanted to travel.
Yeah.
But I guess a lot of them did. Some of them probably went to the brickyards because the brickyards was always employing people. So I think they had a big turnaround because of it's hard work.
Yeah. Well, we've covered a fair bit of ground growing up in Midland.
Yes.
And it was really interesting listening to you describe the process on the chain. Thanks for coming today,
You're welcome.
Geoff. And